Greetings everyone. Welcome to my channel Inside Accountancy by Ch-1 Accounting Made Easy. Today we'll be talking about accounting for share capital, which is a very important chapter, and I've got a lot of requests from many people to make more and more videos for this chapter, and I'm trying my level best to do that. Please, if you are new to my channel, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. It will really motivate me to make more and more content for you all if it helps. In this video, we are going to talk about a very important topic, that is oversubscription of shares. We'll also be talking about undersubscription of shares, the various alternatives that are available in case of oversubscription, and we'll understand all this with the help of an example. I'm again repeating, this is a very important topic. So, we have talked about the issue of shares, that the issue of shares can be for cash, for consideration other than cash, it can be to promoters or underwriters. So, the issue of shares for cash, if we talk about, in such a situation, two kind of situations may arise. Right, when we are issuing shares for cash, there might be oversubscription or there might be undersubscription. Now, what do we mean by oversubscription and undersubscription? In case of oversubscription, the subscribed capital is greater than the issued capital. What does that mean? In other words, the shares which are offered for subscription, they are lesser than the shares that are subscribed by the public. What does that mean again? For example, a company issued 20,000 shares, offered them to the public for subscription, but the subscriptions were received for, let's say, 40,000 shares. So suppose a company has invited applications for how many shares? 20,000 shares. So these are the shares which have been issued. The issued shares were 20,000, but the applications were received for 40,000. In such a situation, the application received are greater than the number of issued shares. So therefore, this is clearly a case of oversubscription. As you very well know, the subscribed capital can never be greater than the issued capital, because subscribed capital is that part of issued capital that has been subscribed by the public. So if the issued capital is at the rate of 20,000 shares, so subscribed capital cannot exceed more than 20,000 shares. It has to be either 20 or less than 20. So if we have received applications for 40,000 shares, that is clearly a case of oversubscription. On the other hand, undersubscription means when the issued capital is greater than the subscribed capital. In other words, it means when the shares which are offered for subscription, they are greater than the shares which have actually been subscribed by the public. Let's take the same situation, that the company has issued 20,000 shares to the public for subscription, but the applications have been received, let's say, for 18,000 shares. Now this is clearly a case of undersubscription, because the number of shares that have been issued is 20 and the applications have been received for 18,000 shares. So this is a case of undersubscription. Now, so in other words, we can say that the shares are said to be undersubscribed if the number of shares which are applied are less than the number of shares issued for subscription. Okay. Now, according to the SEBI guidelines, you must always remember, this can come in a 1-mark question also. According to the SEBI guidelines, if a company does not receive the minimum subscription of 90%, okay, if a company does not receive the minimum subscription, that is, it does not receive subscription for at least 90% of the shares that have been issued, then it cannot allot the shares. So only if 90% of the shares that have been issued, only if 90% applications have been received out of the shares that have been issued, only then the company can proceed towards allotment of the shares. Otherwise, the company will have to return the excess the application money to the subscribers, and it cannot proceed towards the allotment of shares. Now, what is the accounting treatment in case of undersubscription? In case of undersubscription, the accounting entries, they are passed on the basis of the shares that are applied, because the allotment is made in full to all the applicants. So no matter that we have issued 20,000 shares, but we cannot help it, we cannot pass the entries by taking 20,000 into consideration. So we will pass entries with 18,000. So the accounting treatment will be that we will take the basis of number of shares that have been applied as the basis, and we will pass all the requisite entries. So we will take into consideration this 18,000, not 20,000, because we cannot, like obviously if we have received applications for 18, we cannot increase it to 20. We have received for 18, it will remain at 18. So we will pass all entries for 18. Now, under subscription of shares is very easy because the accounting treatment is also easy. You don't need to do anything. You just have to pass all the entries with the number of shares that have been applied for. So that's quite easy. But in case of oversubscription, we need to make the allotment of shares by following certain alternatives. So allotment in case of oversubscription of shares would involve certain alternatives that have to be chosen by the company. So what are the alternatives that are available to a company? The first alternative is the rejection of excess application money. So some applications basically are accepted in full, and the excess applications are rejected and the money is refunded through bank. So whenever some applications are accepted in full and excess applications are rejected, it is called as rejection of applicants. For example, if let me take an example. For example, let us say that we had issued 50,000 shares. Applications are received for 70,000 shares. So this is clearly a case of oversubscription. We had issued 50,000 shares and we have received applications for 70,000 shares. Now, applications for shares in excess of 50,000. What is the excess here? 20,000. Applications for shares in excess of 50,000, that is, the excess is how much? 20,000 shares are not accepted and their money is refunded. So simple, that on these 20,000 shares, whatever money, that is at the rate of application rate, whatever money that you have received will be refunded to the subscribers through bank. So that's the first alternative. Now the second alternative is partial or pro rata allotment. Now under this situation, all applicants are allotted shares in proportion. So in proportion, that is why we call it as partial or pro rata allotment. For example, if we consider the same example where we had issued 50,000 shares and we had the applications we received for 70,000 shares. In this same example, if the shares are allotted to all the applicants in the ratio of 5 shares for every 7 shares applied, maybe that ratio can be decided by the company. So in a proportion the shares are allotted. In that case, that is referred to as partial or pro rata allotment. For example, let's say A has applied for 100 shares. Okay, 100 shares have been applied by A, but the company allots him only 80 shares. So that means this is a case of pro rata allotment or partial allotment. A person has applied for more shares but lesser number of shares are allotted to him. The third alternative is the combination of the above two alternatives, that is rejection of excess application money and pro rata allotment. So basically, under this situation, some shares may be directly rejected and their money may be refunded through bank, and some shares may be given pro rata allotment. Okay, so it is a combination of the previous two cases or the alternatives that we have discussed. Now, what are the accounting entries in case of oversubscription of shares? Now there are not you will not find it much different than the entries that I've already talked about in my previous videos. The basic entries for the issue of shares for cash, you can click on the I button for more details. So the entries would be the first entry, this a random example I have taken above so that I can just explain the entries to you. So the first entry, that in case of, you very well know that there are few stages in case of installment method. And in the example that I've taken application, allotment and call. So there are 3 stages and every stage has 2 entries. One is for receiving, the other one is for due. And in case of application, we always pass the receiving entry first. So our receiving entry would be bank account DR to share application. Now how can we calculate this amount? Now this amount can be calculated by multiplying multiplying the number of shares that have been applied into the application rate. Now, what are the number of shares that have been applied? From this example, it is written X Limited invited applications for 20,000 shares. So these are the shares that have been issued, but applications were received for 30,000 shares. So number of shares applied are 30,000. So 30,000 multiplied by the rate of application, which is given as 3, will give us the amount. Okay. So after we pass the receive entry, then we come to the due entry, and in this due entry, the pro rata allotment is to be made. I mean, it has to be shown here. So how can we show it here? So our basic entry is share application account DR to share capital. This much you already know. I've already talked about this, explained this in detail. But depending upon the conditions that are given in the question, the money will be utilized towards bank or share allotment or calls in advance. I'll explain it again. In share application, we will put the amount by multiplying the number of shares applied into the application rate, which is same as in the previous case, in the previous entry, 30,000 into 3. Then in share capital, we will multiply the number of shares issued, because we are talking about share capital now. So number of shares issued into application rate, that is number of shares issued were 20,000. So 20,000 into 3 will be my share capital. Now depending upon the question and depending upon what is given in the question, we will put the money in bank or share allotment or calls. So in bank, we are going to put the excess application money, which is to be refunded to the shareholders. It will change from question to question. And under share allotment, we will put the excess application money that has been adjusted on application. And in calls in advance, we will write the excess application money adjusted on call. Now this must be very confusing for you all, that how will we come to know what is to be put in allotment and what is to be put in calls. I will explain all this in detail with an example that I'm going to take. For now, you can understand that the basic entry is share application to share capital, and depending upon the question, you will put the money, excess application money in bank or share allotment or calls in advance. Now the next entry would be for the due entry for allotment. So now till here, till the application stage, we were considering this 30,000. Now after the second entry, the due entry for application, we have adjusted this 30,000 and we have reduced it to 20. We have adjusted the excess application money. So from allotment onwards, we are going to pass entries on the basis of number of shares that have been issued. Number of shares issued. So that is in this question it is 20,000. So in the due entry, we are going to multiply the number of shares issued into the allotment rate. So number of shares issued was 20,000 multiplied by allotment rate was 4, and we'll get the amount. Next is the receiving entry for allotment. Now this is a very tricky entry, and like many students, they make mistake here. What they do is that if 80,000, with 80,000, if they have passed the due entry, then in the next entry also they write 80,000. But this would be wrong. Why? Because you have already written share allotment account in the second entry. You have credited share allotment account with certain amount. Right. Now that amount has to be adjusted in the receiving entry for allotment. So therefore, in this entry, which amount will you put? The amount which is due on allotment. What is the amount due on allotment? 80,000 in the example that I've taken, less the amount which is adjusted on application. That is the excess money that has been utilized towards allotment. So after subtracting that, the net amount will be mentioned here in this entry. Now next entries will be same. Again, we will pass the entry for due of the first call, the number of shares issued multiplied by the first call rate. That's how we'll get the amount here. And then we'll have the receiving entry. In the receiving entry, again, you have to be very, very careful. You have to put the net amount here. In case any money is adjusted on call, that money has to be subtracted from here. So amount which is due on call less the less the amount that has been adjusted on call. So we will subtract from the due, we will subtract the excess amount that has been adjusted, right? So these are the entries that you will pass. So basically the entries remain the same. The only change, as you can see, would be in the receiving entry for application in this entry, and in the receiving entry in the due entry for application, and in the receiving entry for allotment and calls. There you will have certain changes in the amount in case the depending upon the alternative that has been chosen. Now let's take an example and understand the oversubscription of shares. So Crystal Hospitality Limited invited applications for 1 lakh equity shares of 50 each, payable as under. So what is the, first of all you should identify and you should understand that what is the total number of shares that have been issued, what are the different rates that are given, applications are received for how many shares. So that should be crystal clear. So invited applications for 1 lakh shares means this 1 lakh shares is the number of shares that have been issued. Okay, then 50 is the face value. On application we've called 10, on allotment 15, on first call 15, on second and final call 10. Applications were received for 4 lakh shares. So these are the number of shares that have been applied. So number of shares issued are 1 lakh and applications have been received for 4 lakh shares. So this is clearly a case of oversubscription. We had issued 1 lakh, we have received applications for 4 lakh. We have to reduce this 4 lakh to 1 lakh, right? Past journal entries for the issue under each of the following cases. Now few cases are given to you in the question. We will understand all these cases one by one. So these cases are just a second. Yeah, so these cases are allotted 1 lakh shares in full to select applicants and the applications for the remaining 3 lakh shares were rejected. Let's go to the solution and there only I'll explain this to you. So allotted 1 lakh shares in full. Okay, so I'm going to write here our total number of issued shares was 1 lakh and we had received applications for 4 lakh. Now they are saying allotted 1 lakh shares in full. Okay, that means to selected applicants who had applied for 1 lakh shares, we've given them full 1 lakh shares. How many shares could we give? We had issued 1 lakh. So we could give only 1 lakh shares. So to the selected applicants who had asked for 1 lakh shares, we've given them full 1 lakh shares and the applications for the remaining 3 lakh shares were rejected. What does this mean? Remaining shares, obviously the excess shares were 3 lakh. All these 3 lakh shares, they were rejected. That means their money was returned through bank. Okay. So now what will be the entries here? Our first entry would be bank to share application, the entry for receiving. The entry for receiving will be with the number of shares. As I told you, number of shares applied are how much? 4 lakh. So 4 lakh into the rate of application. Now rate of application was 10. So therefore the amount is 40 lakh. That means on application we have received over subscription and we have received total 40 lakh on application. Then in the due entry we are going to make an adjustment of this 40 lakh. So our entry will be equity share application. It will be debited with the same amount with which it has been credited in the previous entry, that is 40 lakh. Equity share capital, there the amount always is put on the basis of number of shares issued. Number of shares issued were how many? 1 lakh. 1 lakh shares multiplied by the rate of application, that is 10. So 10 lakh will be in will come in equity share capital, and they were saying remaining 3 lakh shares were rejected. So 3 lakh multiplied by 10 because they had also paid at the rate of 10 only. So 3 lakh into 10, 30 lakh is the amount that is refunded. So depending upon the question I told you, we will write here to bank or to share allotment or to calls in advance. In this particular case that we are talking about, we are not adjusting the money. We have not made the pro rata allotment. We are only rejecting the excess application straight away. So therefore total 30 lakh which was in excess has been transferred to bank. Next will be the due entry for allotment, which will be equity share allotment to equity share capital. Now, from this entry onwards, we are not going to consider the 4 lakh as we considered in the previous two entries. Here, we are going to consider the number of shares issued, that is 1 lakh, into the rate of allotment, that is 15. So, amount is 15 lakh. Then we proceed towards the receiving entry for allotment. Bank account DR to equity share allotment, the same amount. Why have we written the same amount? Because in the second entry, nothing has been adjusted on allotment. Therefore, we are receiving the same amount that is due. If in case in the second entry, we had adjusted something on allotment, we would have subtracted it here. But we are not doing it because we didn't adjust it. The next entry will be the entry for due. Again, equity share first call to equity share capital, the number of shares issued was 1 lakh into 15, that is the rate of first call, amount is 15 lakh. Then again, the receiving entry for first call will also be 15 because nothing has been adjusted on first call. Then we will pass the due entry for second call, the second and final call. So 1 lakh shares at the rate of 10 rupees, that is the second call rate, so amounts to 10 lakh. And finally, the receiving entry again will be made with 10 lakh only because we have not received anything that has been adjusted on application on the final call. So these are the entries that we'll pass in the first case. Now let's move to the second case. Again, I'm going to write here so that you do not forget. The number of shares issued were, 1 lakh, and you had received applications for 4 lakh, right? We had excess of 3 lakh with us, right? This was the criteria. Now, pro-rata allotment of 25% of the shares applied to every applicant. That means proportionate allotment was made. Instead of finding out this 3 lakh, what they are saying is that to the applicants of 4 lakh, people who had applied for 4 lakh, 25%, everybody, like for example, a person who asked for, let's say 100 shares was given 25 shares. So 25% of the shares applied to every applicant. Pro rata allotment of 25% of the shares applied to every applicant. So those who had applied for 4 lakh shares, they were given 1 lakh shares. 1 lakh is 25% of 4 lakh. For example, let's say out of this 4 lakh, there was a person having 100 shares. So one who asked for 100 shares, he got only 25 shares and so on. But we are not, this is just an example that I gave you. So in this question, they are saying that, out of the total number of shares that are applied, 25% allotment was made. Okay. Then they are saying, to apply the balance of application money towards amount due on allotment, and the excess money that was, now see, out of 4 lakh, only 1 lakh shares were given. So their excess application money which they have, that is utilized towards the next stage. For example, again take an example, 100 shares were given, only 25 shares. Those who asked for 100 shares got only 25. But 100, those who asked for 100 shares, they had paid application money for 100 shares, but we have kept application money for only 25 shares. That means on 75 shares, application money is in excess. So that excess can be utilized. Instead of returning it back to them, we can utilize it towards the next stage, which is allotment. I hope I'm making my point clear to you. Let's understand with the help of the working note that I've made. Excess application money is 30 lakh. How do we know that? Because number of shares applied were 4 lakh. Number of shares issued were 1 lakh. At the rate of application is 30 lakh, right? Now, transfer to equity share allotment would be only for those shares that have been allotted. Out of 4 lakh, we have made allotment to only 1 lakh shares. So 1 lakh only will pay the amount on allotment. So 1 lakh shares into 15. 15 lakh will be adjusted on allotment, and the balance amount is 15 lakh that will be refunded through bank. So let us see how this will affect our journal entries. The first entry would remain the same. Number of shares applied, that is 4 lakh, multiply by the rate of application, that gives us 40 lakh. The second entry would be equity share application debited with the same amount with which it was credited in the previous entry. Equity share capital, I told you, we always pass entry with the number of shares issued into the application rate, that is 10 lakh. And we calculated that the amount which is used on allotment is 1 lakh shares will pay 15 rupees at the rate of allotment, because we had surplus. How much surplus did we have? We had surplus of 3 lakh shares. So 3 lakh at the rate of 10, that means 30 lakh is the amount that we have in surplus. So out of this 30 lakh, 15 lakh can easily be used towards allotment. Instead of returning that 30 lakh, out of that 15 lakh we are using for the next stage. And then the excess is refunded, which is 15 lakh. Now the next entry would be for the due of allotment, which will be same. Again, number of shares issued into the rate of allotment, that is 15 lakh. The next entry for receiving of allotment money would have been this, where we would have received 15 lakh. But as you can see, equity share allotment has already been credited with 15 lakh. The excess money on application which was utilized on allotment was 15 lakh. So we have already received this 15 lakh on application. So this entry we are not going to pass. We are not going to pass the receiving entry for allotment. The rest of the entries will be absolutely same because there are nothing has been adjusted on any of the call or any of the final call, first call or final call. So the rest of the entries will be exactly the same. Now moving on to the next case. Now the next case is reject applicants of 2 lakh shares, accept full applications for 80,000 shares. Reject applications for 2 lakh means those who applied for 2 lakh, they got nothing, nil. Accept full applications for 80,000 means those who applied for 80, they got 80,000 shares. And make a pro-rata allotment of 20,000 shares to the remaining applicants. So the remaining applicants, they were given how many shares? 20,000 shares. Excess application money to be adjusted towards allotment and call. Only when it is mentioned will be adjusted towards allotment and call. Now here I am going to show you how to do the same question. You see, you can do the same question directly also. But I always ask my students that initially you should always make this table, the statement showing adjustment of excess application money, because once you get the hang of it, once you know how to make this table, I think you will the chances of making error would be very very less. So you can do it directly, but I would suggest if you want to do it directly, do it towards when you've practiced a lot of questions with the table, then I think you should do it directly. So I'll explain. Whenever there are categories given in the question, so you should always make this statement. Okay, it will be really helpful to you. Okay, how can we make it? There are three categories that are given here. Three categories given. Reject applicants for 2 lakh shares. That means those who applied for 2 lakh, they got nothing. So as you can see, I've made some columns here. Category, number of shares applied, नंबर ऑफ शेयर्स अलॉटेड मींस लोगों ने कितने मांगे और लोगों को कितने शेयर्स हमने दिए. एप्लीकेशन मनी रिसीव्ड, हाउ मच अमाउंट हैव वी रिसीव्ड ऑन एप्लीकेशन एंड हाउ मच अमाउंट हैव वी transferred to share capital. What is the excess money that we have received and how are we going to allocate it to share allotment or calls in advance or bank. So the first category was those who asked for 2 lakh, they got nothing. Their applications were rejected. Then those who asked for 80,000, they got 80,000 shares. And then it is given that pro-rata allotment of 20,000 shares was made to the balance. We don't know what the remaining applicants were, but we know that number of shares allotted were how much? 20,000. Now we very well know, we can find out the total here. We very well know total number of shares applied and total number of shares allotted. Total number of shares applied were 4 lakh and we had issued. Total number of shares allotted is the issued. So we had issued 1 lakh shares. We know the totals here. Then after you do this, you should always check the totals. Now this is amounting to 1 lakh, but this will be the balancing figure. So that is 1,20,000. So those who asked for 1,20,000, proportionate allotment was made and they were given only only 20,000 shares. Now what is the next step? First you put all the categories here into number of shares applied and allotted. The next step is you multiply the number of shares applied with application money to see that these people, how much money have they actually paid to the company, the application money received. Then you multiply the number of shares allotted with the application rate to see that how much is the amount that we have transferred to share capital on the application stage. Then we find out the difference between both, that is the total application money that we have received and the total money that we have transferred to share capital. The difference is basically the surplus, which will be adjusted towards share allotment or call or bank. Now let's see how we can solve this question. So as I told you, first we have to multiply the number of shares applied into the application rate. Application rate is 10. So application money received will be 20 lakh. Then next step would be number of shares allotted into application rate. Since 0 multiplied by 10 would be obviously 0. Then we find out the difference, that is the surplus. So surplus 20 lakh minus 0 will be 20 lakh. So this surplus will directly go towards bank. Why will it go towards bank? Because of the reason that we are rejecting the applicant. So directly I've put 20 lakh under bank column. Then moving on to the second category, again number of shares applied into the application rate will give me application money received. So 80,000 into 10, 80 lakh. Then number of shares allotted into application money gives me the amount to be put under share capital again, which is 8 lakh. Then we find out the difference between both. There is no difference, no surplus. Since there is no surplus, we cannot put anything in allotment or advance or bank. Moving to the third category. Again, number of shares applied into application rate 10 gives us 12 lakh. Number of shares allotted, that is 20,000 into the application rate 10 gives us 2 lakh. Then we find out the difference between the two, which is 10 lakh. Now this 10 lakh is the amount of surplus that we have, which we are going to utilize towards the allotment or call or bank. But before, now how can we know that what is the amount we should put in allotment, what is the amount we should put in call, and what is the amount that we should put in bank? We don't know that. How can we calculate? See, in allotment, since the number of shares allotted here, that is the maximum amount that we can allot is 20,000. That means on allotment, total 20,000 at the rate of allotment rate was 15. So total amount that can come here is 20,000 at the rate of 15. These people who had been allotted 20,000 shares, what amount were they required to pay on allotment? On allotment, they were required to pay 20,000 into 15, which amounts to 3 lakh. Right, so we know we can put 3 lakh here. Why? Because we had total of 10 lakh with us. Out of 10 lakh, 3 lakh is put here. Still we have surplus of 5 lakh, right? Now, how do we know what amount should we put in calls in advance? Again, 20,000 is the number of shares. How much amount will they put on calls? Now, first call was for 15, I think, and the second call was for 10. Right, so total is 25. So 20,000 shares, they have to pay 25 rupees on calls, which is 5 lakh. Since I had 5 lakh with me, since I had 7 lakh with me, still surplus, because out of 10, only 3 lakh has been adjusted. So 7 lakh was still surplus. So out of 7, 5 lakh I have put in calls. Now this 5 lakh is for the first call also and for the final call also. Then we still have 2 lakh as balance. So that balance will be refunded through bank. After doing this, we will find out the total for all these columns. So we can easily find out the columns. Now these are the balances which we are going to put in our journal entries. So once we have made this table, we only have to put the amounts in the journal entries. You must be wondering what amounts. So look at these amounts which have been highlighted here. Share application money. That is the total money that you've received on application. The first entry, the receiving entry for application, will be made with this amount. Share capital. That means in the second entry, in the due entry, this is the amount of share capital. Then in the second entry, that is in the due entry, this will be the amount for share allotment. In the second entry, that is the due entry, this will be the amount for calls in advance, and this will be the amount for bank. So we did not make any other calculations. We just made the tables, did some multiplication, adding, and we got the respective amount. So this would ensure that you've not made anything wrong if you make it in the correct procedure. Okay, so let's move on to the solution. Also, if you want to make it directly, you can also do it directly, but I would suggest initially you should do it with the table. The first entry remains the same as it was in the previous two cases. If you want to do it directly, this is how you can do it. Excess application money was 30 lakh. We transferred to equity share allotment since pro-rata was made to 20,000 shares. So 20,000 into 5, that is 3 lakh. Sorry, 15, that is 3 lakh. And to calls, 20,000 into the first call, 20,000 into the final call. So total 5 lakh, and 22 lakh is the total amount that has been refunded if you want to do it directly. See, this may seem very easy, but if you do it directly, a lot of errors may be committed by the children. So again, do it with the table initially. Okay, so the next entry would be share application account DR, again 40 lakh. Now, since in this question we had transferred to allotment also, calls also, and bank also, that's why we have written here. So in the statement that we made, in the columns, whichever columns you have money in, you will be putting it here. Say for example, in this question, nothing was adjusted on calls. We wouldn't have written the calls here then. Okay. So we've put the amounts that we calculated from the table: 40 lakh, 10 lakh, 3 lakh, 5 lakh, and 22 lakh. Then we'll pass the entry for due of the allotment money, which we have passed previously also. Then the entry for receiving of allotment money. Now look here, please. The total amount due was 15 lakh. We had to receive 15 lakh on allotment. But out of this 15 lakh on allotment, we have already received how much? We have received 3 lakh. So minus 3 lakh. So we are going to receive 12 lakh on allotment. The next entries would be the due entry for first call at the rate of 15 lakh, same as before. Then they will pass the entry for receiving. In the receiving entry, again we have to adjust the amount that has been adjusted on call. Now the total amount adjusted on call is 5 lakh, but out of this 5 lakh, for first call we have 3 lakh, and for second call we have 2 lakh, right? So the calls in advance which was credited here, now it is debited here because we are cancelling this account. We are showing that 3 lakh has already been received out of 15 lakh. So 12 lakh is the amount that we are receiving on the call. Similarly, you pass the entry for due of the final call, which will be same as in the previous cases. And when you pass the entry for receiving, the calls in advance is debited because we have to close this account. So the final call that was already received was, as I said 2 lakh. So 2 lakh I've already received out of 10 lakh. So 8 lakh is the amount that I'm finally going to receive. So again, I'm going to repeat, please make sure you understand the making of the table. Please do the questions with the table initially, and then you can, once you get a practice, then you can move towards directly solving the questions. Right. So this is all about the oversubscription. I hope it was clear to everybody. We talked about oversubscription, undersubscription, partial pro-rata allotment, rejecting the applications, and so on. Again, I'm saying table is very important, and this topic is also very important. I hope the concepts were clear to you. If you have any questions, you can contact me on my email ID, or you can leave your comments in the comment section below. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It really means a lot to me when I see my subscriber count rising. Feels that I'm doing something for someone. Thank you so much. This is Inside Accountancy by Ch-1 signing off.